All right. And in order to coordinate the live stream, we're actually starting in about 4 minutes. So in 4 minutes, I'll hand it over.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Center for Indian Country Development's 10th anniversary event. My name is Aline Shurmoff and I'm the Senior Vice President of Community Development and Engagement, which also includes our Center for Indian Country Development here at the Minneapolis Fed. There are many folks who traveled to join us to join us today in person and hundreds more joining online. We want to say welcome to all of you and thank you for being with us. Over the next 2 days, we'll hear from many tribal leaders, Federal Reserve leaders, and experts from across Indian country. We are so excited to share this moment with all of you and grateful to all of our speakers who will share their insights with all of us. Anniversaries like ours today invite us to reflect on where we've come, what we've learned, and where we're going. You see this reflected in the theme of our event, Braiding the Past and Future of Native Economies. The work that we do in research and data, however you interact with the work, however you intersect with the work, is detailed and rarely easy. It requires overcoming data challenges with limited resources, understanding complex issues, and ultimately doing the hard work of translating that research into action. Moments like this provide us the opportunity to step back and reflect on the bigger picture, to recognize areas where we've made progress, recognize where we may have stumbled, and identify emerging opportunities to help us chart the path for the next decade. Anniversaries are also an opportunity for us to give gratitude and thanks. We know that progress in this work happens in collaboration, and over the past decade, we've seen countless examples of individuals and organizations coming together to advance economic research and data in Indian country. And so I want to thank all of the tribal leaders, current and former Center for Indian Country Development Leadership Council members, Community Advisory Board members, the Minneapolis Fed Board of Directors, the Helena Branch Board of Directors, who are all here and who have supported our work over the years. We're so fortunate to have such a broad group of experts who engage with our work and actionable research and data, and who provide us with their tremendous insights. I also want to thank Minneapolis Fed leaders, our President Neil Kashkari, our first Vice President Ron Feldman, who offer leadership and support to our team to be able to do this work. Our colleagues and leaders of the Board of Governors, including Governor Barr, who will join us later this afternoon, have been tremendous supporters and are very supportive of our work. The Center for Indian Country Development's staff as well, and I also want to recognize former staff in honor of the theme of today's event is Braiding the Past, the Present, and ultimately the Future. We need to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of visionary people like Sue Woodrow or Patrice Kunesh, along with colleagues at the time who were some of the first people to seed the work and to plant the seeds of the work that we celebrate today. And as we think about our work going forward in partnership with some of our colleagues, not only at the Minneapolis Fed, but across the Federal Reserve System, and to our colleagues at the board, we're partners in this work, and we're so grateful for the opportunity that we have to work together with all of you. I see some of my colleagues here from Kansas City, from San Francisco. Really appreciate that. You may have also seen our anniversary artwork for our event, which you can see here, but also on our event website. I want to thank the artist who created this work, Rachel Two-Teeth Picardo, for representing our anniversary theme so beautifully in this piece. The artwork shows the interconnectedness of traditional and modern tribal economies and was designed as digital ledger art, as an image of an actual balance sheet from the Minneapolis Fed's Helena branch in 1921. You can read more about this anniversary artwork on our event website. We have a wonderful program in store for you for the next 2 days. I'm going to turn it over now to Casey Lozar, the Vice President here at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis and the Center for Indian Country Development's Director. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Aline, and Hasquahout, Trumne Titiwit Skuriet Squest, Chenis Salish and Skolsam, Kulam Chimp Konahu. My name is Casey Lozar. I'm an enrolled member of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes in western Montana, and I have the honor and the privilege to be able to serve as the director of the Center for Indian Country Development. And I just want to welcome everybody to the Minneapolis Fed, all of you that are here in the room and the hundreds that are online, for sharing with us this wonderful opportunity to reflect on 10 years of the Center for Indian Country Development. I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to not only celebrate, but to reflect and to look into the future with each one of you. You know, in Indian country, one of the most important things that we do when we come together in a gathering is to have an invocation or a blessing to remind us where we come from, who we come from, and to reorient ourselves to our why. And we are honored to have Reed Raymond here today to share a blessing with all of us. Reed is a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe of South Dakota. And while he's here in his role as a community member, he's also a distinguished attorney. Following the blessing, we'll have a hand drum song from Zach Redbear, who is a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux of South Dakota. Zach has performed traditional grass dancing and drum songs for most of his life, and he shares grass dancing and powwow teachings to the communities here in the Twin Cities. In Native culture, drums are a powerful way of honoring community and of connecting our past to not only our present, but to our future. And at this time, I'd like to invite you to turn your attention to both Reed and Zach, who will help ground our time together today.
Hamatakwepi, Chante Washte Nape Chuzapilo. I'm Reed Raymond, and I was asked to do the prayer here today, and it's an honor and a privilege. And I was asked in a really good way by the staff here what they were doing. It's a momentous occasion, and we're on a tight schedule here. So normally when we have a prayer or a ceremony, we don't put a limitation on the time, but I'm aware of the schedule. So what I did was I got up early this morning at our home where we have a fireplace, and I lit it up and kept it going. And then just before I came over here, I said a lot of prayers at that time for the usual prayers that I say for the mourners, the sick ones, the members of the armed services. And because of the way things are, I also said a prayer for our nation. It's something I don't usually think about needing to do, but I did that. And so I'm going to be using the feather that came from my kola, Jim Claremont, Washichi Washte. And when I was thinking about him and the feather, he passed away this year. He also gave me a cedar bag. And on that cedar bag, there's a Vikings logo. So I wanted to mention that to you. And I was glad the Fed has purple chairs. So I'm going to say a very few words. I'm going to thank the Creator once again, and then I'm going to ask that the anniversary turns out good, and then I'm going to pray for each one of you, and I'm going to keep it kind of short because we're on a schedule. And when I get done, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to fan off the picture. And then I'm going to fan off Zach and his drum, and he's going to sing a real nice song for us. Maybe more than one. I don't know. So, I just wanted to tell you that when I do this, I always ask people to join in with me, because my call, he said, we all have to have take care of our spiritual lives. And so when I'm praying, if you want, you could pray along with me in your minds, or you can meditate, however you want to do it. And then also I wanted to recognize those of you that are older than I am and the members of our tribe. I'm just a common person. I just do what I've been taught. I'm not any kind of special person in any way. And I do appreciate our traditional people. They've been very generous with me. So you can remain seated. Aho, wakantanka, woplatanka chichelo. We chose ani washte makuki wopla chichelo. O tunkashla wakantanka ampetu kile washte ola. O tunkashla omaka wikjemina wo kiksuye yawashte yo. Make the anniversary good for the Center for Indian Country Development. Ho tunkashla wakantanka wichasha na wia kila na wichozani washte na wicho unchare ku ho tunkashla oshima kilo tunkashla ho tunkashla nye wakan tunkashla pahi shina wichasha machiapi oshimakilo pekte kinle haho mitake yase. I'll fan you all off from right here. I'll thank the staff too. Thank you very much. Okay.
Aha mataki ape chante washte wa chuzi ape alo. Hello everybody, my name is Zach Redbear, I'm a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. I'm also a grass dancer, and the song that I learned from the late Johnny Smith was my teacher and grandpa, and so I'm a member of the Red Lake Singers drum group around the Twin Cities here and up in Red Lake, Minnesota. I learned this song back then got the opportunities of singing on this drum group and being a student. This is the way that I learned this song, and there was many other songs that I learned that goes along with the grass dancing and all that. So here it goes. So.
Well, thank you, Reed, and thank you, Zach, for setting the stage for us together this afternoon. Now at this time, I'm pleased to introduce Neil Kashkari, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. Neil has been a strong champion of CICD's work and has made it a priority throughout his tenure to travel out into Indian country, to meet with tribal leaders, to sit down with tribal enterprise executives and community members all across Indian country. We're so incredibly fortunate to have his leadership. Neil.
Thank you, Casey, and thank you all for joining us today here in person and online. I also want to just say thanks to Casey and the CICD team for the outstanding work that they do every day. I've heard this over and over again. I've seen it firsthand, I've experienced it firsthand, but I've also seen it from people across our region and across the country. I remember we had a visitor, who I'm not going to name, a federal policymaker who came through here who said, I don't understand how you're able to do this great work in Indian country. We've been trying to do it, his organization had been trying to do it for a long time and really wasn't able to make progress. And I said, it's the people. It's the people that we have and the trusted partnerships that they've built over a long period of time with tribes in our region and around the country. So just thanks to Casey and the team that we have on CICD for that. You know, the Center for Indian Country Development is what we consider to be a flagship research institute at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and our 10th anniversary is an important milestone. You know, our mission at the Minneapolis Fed, you can see it outside in the hallway, is to pursue a growing economy and a stable financial system that work for all of us. And we can't do that without thriving native economies. It goes back, why are we doing this? It goes back, Congress created the Federal Reserve System. They gave us our goals. One of our assignments is maximum employment. That means as many people in our country gainfully employed and contributing to our economy as possible. That's everybody. That's not some, that's not most, that's everybody. And tribal economies are a big part of our country and a big part of our region. And so it's core to us fulfilling our congressional charge that we make sure that we reduce barriers where we can to provide pathways for Native members to participate in our economy. Now, the next 2 days are going to be an opportunity to look at the future of this work. Aline talked about the event theme, Braiding the Past and Future of Native Economies, which recognizes that we can't look ahead without also understanding where we've come from. This milestone invites each of us to consider lessons we want to carry into the future. And I've recently spent some time reflecting on my own, I've been here now 10 years, my own 10 years with Casey and Aline and the team here and others, and the talented folks who came before them, and what I've learned from them. So if I go back to CICD's founding in 2015, research was drawing attention to economic development needs in Indian country, but our understanding on how to tackle those needs was limited by a lack of quality research and a lack of data. CICD's founders saw an opportunity. My predecessor, former Minneapolis Fed President Narayana Kocherlakota, recognized that we were in a unique position as a trusted research institution to do pioneering work here, especially because we had a history of working with tribal nations. The vision for the center was one that was national in scope, but that would serve as a resource to decision makers here in Minnesota, here in our region, and also nationally. CICD's founders also understood something else that was important. The relevance would depend on the extent that its work was in partnership with tribal nations, not simply done in a research center, but done jointly with tribal nations around the region and around the country. So early on, we established an advisory board of regional and national experts. This leadership council remains a defining characteristic of CICD. Many of the members of that have been participating for years on that research council, and that has helped us to focus our energy on the most important questions, like muting your phone. The most important, I'm going to mute the other one too, by the way. Right? The other one was already muted. That's interesting, it was muted. That's curious. Focusing on the most important research questions that we have as monetary policymakers, but that tribal nations have facing their own economies as well. And so I want to thank the members of that leadership council who have served and continue to serve, because it's vitally important to the work that we do. Over time, our research topics and focus have evolved. The early founders, Sue Woodrow, Dick Todd, I see Dick here today. Hi Dick, haven't seen you in a long time. Patrice Kunesh, advance information and resources on important topics such as home ownership in Indian country, business environment on reservations, and early childhood development. One of these resources that they developed, the Tribal Leaders Handbook on Home Ownership, remains one of the most visited resources on our website today. During these early years, CICD leaders and staff set the standard for high-quality, objective research that has become the hallmark for the work that we do in CICD. Over time, we learned about the economic pillars of tribal economies and the ways that tribes are diversifying their economies. We learned about gaps in access to capital and credit in Native communities and how those gaps ultimately influenced tribal outcomes. CICD's research also increased the understanding of Indian country's relationship to the broader economy, documenting the impact of tribal economies on their own tribes, but also on their regions. I'll give you an example. When I first went to, I think it was one of my first visits to Montana in 2016, I did a roundtable of business leaders who said, it's a historic worker shortage, we can't find workers. The next meeting I did, 30 minutes later, was of tribal leaders saying, our members can't find jobs. And I was just struck by that. It's like, 2 meetings back to back with 2 very different experiences. What are the barriers that are keeping those connections from being made? I hope that we're able to help provide, at least identify those barriers and hopefully reduce some of them. Over the years, CICD staff has been recognized for the kind of research that we're doing, the quality work, and has been invited to share our findings at all levels of policymaking, among local leaders, state leaders, and even federal leaders. We've been invited, some of our staff have been invited to testify before the United States Senate as they have explored different issues on facing tribal economies, given data briefings to congressional members, meeting with tribal councils and boards of Native organizations. We're very proud of the fact that they're being recognized around the country for the expertise that they bring. And in just the last several months, I've had the privilege of joining Casey and Aline on a number of visits with tribal leaders to the Mille-Lacs Band of Ojibwe and the Winnebago tribe, just to name a couple of them. And there we learned about how they're tackling labor challenges, how they're serving a national, even a global economy, and also meeting the needs of their members at the same time. And we've learned from the world around us. Casey accepted his job as director of the CICD. I remember this in February 2020. As you might recall, the world changed a few weeks later, but he and the team were up to the task. When I remember this vividly, Congress was allocating in 2020 a lot of money to support the whole U.S. economy. They allocated some money dedicated for tribal economies, and then they realized, hey, they don't know how tribal economies work. And they don't actually know how to get the money out to tribal economies. They don't know how to actually structure the programs so that tribal economies could take advantage of those programs. Even though the money was there, if the programs weren't designed right, they would not be utilized. And Casey and team here were happy to step up. They did surveys, custom surveys in the moment to reach out and to figure out what are the needs at the moment of tribal economies and tribal businesses facing the COVID challenge. And we're really proud of the work that they had done. I could go on and on. We have a wonderful agenda for you over the next couple days. Again, we're really thrilled that you all are here. Thank you for your partnership. This is a 10-year anniversary. This is not a finish line, obviously. This is just a milestone to recognize the great progress that has been made, and we look forward to continuing to work with you as we go forward. Thank you, Casey.
Well, thank you, Neil. And again, it's a profound honor to be together with all of you. This is not just an important milestone for the Center for Indian Country Development's history. It's an important time for Indian country as we all reflect on what's been a period of truly remarkable economic innovation in Indian country. And in honor of this occasion, we are hosting 44 flags from the tribal nations across the Federal Reserve District here at the Minneapolis Fed. And in Indian country, flags hold some really important symbolism. And hanging in our halls here at the Minneapolis Fed, they are a reminder of our resilience as Native people and our responsibility not only to our history, but a responsibility to our relatives. I just want to thank the tribes for sharing your flags with the Minneapolis Fed. This time every year, I find myself thinking a lot about my grandpa. It was always in the fall that he would take us up into the mountains, and I didn't like it at the time, but we would cut cordwood every single weekend to make it through the harsh Montana winters. And he passed away a few years ago, and I've been thinking about an experience that I had going through his papers right after he took his journey. See, my grandpa was a patriarch in a large Native family, extended family on the Flathead Indian Reservation where I grew up. And my whole life, I revered my grandpa. He was he had a successful career as a government official in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He was well respected in our communities, and he was one of the happiest people I've ever met. He truly embodied a good life lived. In his papers, he had saved a copy of a letter that he wrote decades earlier in the early 1950s to the BIA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And at the time, he was serving in the field office at the Umatilla Reservation in Oregon. And he wrote this letter in response to a job offer he got for a leadership position at the BIA in Washington, D.C. And this was a big deal for him. He grew up with limited access to formal education, with limited access to career prospects in our community. But in this letter, my grandpa turned down the job. And he wrote, and I'll quote from the letter, "In all fairness to my supervisors and the Indian people, I believe that at least another year of field experience will better qualify me for the position mentioned in the telegram. I accepted this job at the Umatilla Reservation without an increase in pay to gain experience of all types, which will prepare me for better service as well as sound judgment to serve the Indian people. For this reason, I believe the experience gained while at Umatilla will be a great asset to all concerned." A great asset to all concerned. See, he did this because he understood how his work on a daily basis served issues much larger than himself. And he understood how his day-to-day work served future generations. So I share this story because I think his words apply to the work that we all do here at the Center for Indian Country Development and the work that all of you do in your own ways to advance the economic prosperity for Indian country. You know, this work is often quiet. It takes time. It takes a million small actions by individuals both inside and outside of Indian country. It advances issues much larger than what's on our own plates. But one study, one data set, one evidence-based decision at a time, it serves future generations. See, we're all here because we care about the future of Indian country and about Indian country's contribution to the broader economy. So whether you're a tribal leader or a practitioner, a policymaker, a researcher, we are all contributing in our own best possible way. And this really gives me great hope for the future. However complex and challenging the economic conditions or the economic questions of the future may be, I know that collectively, all of us here will continue to be a great asset to all concerned, as my grandpa would say. And I'd like to just highlight a few examples of how I'm already seeing this taking shape all across Indian country. One example is how tribes are really seizing technological innovations to advance their collection and data use in Indian country. In a recent CICD article, we shared the story of how the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa is leveraging technology for their own tribal census. Each household in their nation is assigned a survey code, which enables the tribe to conduct the census without asking for identifiable information. Codes are then tracked in a software system that shows survey staff which households have completed the survey and which ones need additional follow-up. And the latest Red Cliff survey had a 90% response rate, providing invaluable information for the tribe's comprehensive plan. And that's in comparison to the 67% response rate of the recent 2020 decennial census. So there are examples like this that are happening all across Indian country of tribes really leveraging technology to gather the best possible data to inform their decision making. Another way I see Indian country approaching economic questions in the best ways that we know how, of course, is through research and through data collaborations. Tribes, Native organizations, and researchers are working together to take on some of the most complex research needs that would be hard for any one individual entity to try to address on their own. One example of this, which we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow, is the Survey of Native Nations. And this is a collaboration between CICD and tribal governments to address a long-standing gap in tribal public finance data. This work is comprehensive. This work is very complex for many, many reasons, not the least of which is the need to steward tribal data in the most secure way. It simply couldn't be done without collaboration between the participating tribes who own and who govern their own data and a research institute like CICD with the infrastructure to be able to securely store and protect tribal data and to do the deep analysis for our tribal participants. We see similar research collaborations happening with Native organizations. One recent partnership that CICD has is with the Wista Corporation, where we partnered together to survey Native community development financial institutions, in essence, to provide a census of the Native CDFI industry. See, in these ways, partners all across Indian country and beyond are coming together to address some of the most challenging data needs in ways that none of us could do on our own. I also see examples of peers across Indian country sharing knowledge and resources to help each other do the best possible research. During last year's data summit, CICD's data summit, our leadership council member, Dr. Stephanie Russo-Carroll, who is the director of the Collaboratory for Indigenous Data Governance, talked about the growing number of resources that are becoming available this last decade to support tribes and other researchers to apply tribal data sovereignty principles. Resources such as the CARE principles are making it easier for everyone to apply these best practices and ensure that research in Indian country is being conducted in a good way, which at times in our history it hasn't. In the same spirit, CICD has published our own principles for research and data use as a way of making them available and transparent to the public and to future Indian country collaborators. I've also heard of many examples of tribes offering to share information about how they conduct their own data collections with other tribes who are looking to do the same. And a number of tribal leaders have shared their tribal census work and their tribal census experiences here at our annual data summit. So by sharing knowledge and resources, we're tapping into our own historical knowledge and really applying it to strengthening not only our economics in Indian country, but our tribal governance. And of course, we can only approach economic questions well if we do so with the highest quality data. As Neil said, CICD's founders set the standard for the rigorous research that CICD is known for, and I'm very, very proud of our staff who are upholding those standards every single day in our research and data work. I see a similar commitment to the best possible data in communities and organizations in Indian country. In an interview with one of our Leadership Council members, Dr. Alicia Murphy, where she spoke about her experience as the first full-time permanent economist with the Navajo Nation. She talked about how important it is to have trusted data to make important tribal decisions, even though collecting data isn't often easy in Indian country. It takes time, it takes resources, and sometimes it takes collaborations across multiple facets of government. But in the end, it all comes down to the quality of the data that drives quality analysis for decisions to take care of the future of our relatives in Indian country. This is certainly an exciting and a dynamic time to be able to do economic research and data work in Indian country. And as we look to the future, I do so with great confidence that, like my grandpa, individuals, organizations, and tribal governments across Indian country and beyond will serve this work in the best way that we know how, approaching the economic questions of the future with the best possible information. Engaging in this work with all of you is the privilege of a lifetime. Lum lums. Now I am excited to bring Aline back up to the stage to introduce our first panel of the day. And for those of you that are online, if you have any questions, you can submit your questions to our email box at cicd@mpls.frb.org. Aline.
Great. Thank you, Casey. And I would invite our panelists up to the stage as well. Chief Executive Benjamin, Dawson Her Many Horses, Miranda Compton. Excellent. Well, thank you all for being on our first panel this afternoon. Really what we're set to discuss today is expanding the impact of data and analysis in shaping tribal economies. And I have a tremendous panelists here with me today. I'm so honored to be on the stage with all of you. I'll start with introductions. Chief Executive Melanie Benjamin is now currently Vice President of Government Relations and Engagement at Bluestone Strategy Partners, a Native-owned firm that works to strengthen tribal sovereignty. She previously served as Chief Executive of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe after first being elected in the year 2000, from 2000 to 2024, right? And is also a member of the Center for Indian Country Development's Leadership Council. Next to her is Dawson Her Many Horses, is a managing director at Wells Fargo. Before being named managing director, he was appointed head of Native American banking at Wells Fargo in 2021, and he's also a member of the CICD's Leadership Council. Miranda Compton, last but not least, is the founder and president of Lepway Inc., a strategic consulting firm that helps tribal nations and their partners navigate considerations with developing permitting and managing projects in Indian country. I like to describe this kind of at the intersection of legal but also implementation in bringing partners together. She serves as adjunct professor at the University of Montana's Law School and is a past CICD policy fellow. So please join me in welcoming them. We started out today talking about, from a research perspective, we're always looking for accurate, relevant, and impartial data to support our understanding of the economy and ultimately shaping our understanding of what's happening in communities across the country. And for many years, we have heard Indian country leaders talking to us about their data needs, about the availability, accessibility, reliability of data, how it's held, how it's treated. We also really want to look at this from a user standpoint. As I think about the three of you on this stage, somebody with deep expertise in tribal government leadership, from somebody from financial services, somebody who's at the intersection of community and government and implementation. I want to ask my first question to Chief Executive Benjamin. All of us use data in all of our daily lives. Given your extensive experience at the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, can you tell us how you see tribal citizens and practitioners like tribal governments currently using data, and if you think that they could benefit from other types of data?
Thank you. To start with answering the question, I think that when we look at that whole concept of data, one of our strongest and first type of documents is our treaties. So when we think about our treaties, that kind of identified where the reservation boundaries were and what all of those different boundaries were. And so for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, during my tenure, we always reminded people that we were a treaty tribe, we had those responsibilities. And then as we move into like the day-to-day responsibilities of tribal governance, that we're going to be dealing with a lot of people. And of course, that is the general council or the tribal membership that, number one, should always have that information first. And because they're the ones that are going to give you the go to move in whatever direction you want to go. And when we're looking at big projects, housing projects, whatever those may be, our financial partners, also our partners at the local and state and federal level. And anytime we deal with those individuals, that it's imperative that we have data, whatever that may be, whatever the topic is, economic development. It was mentioned earlier that in Indian country, that we're, especially in rural America, we're the ones that have the highest jobs in our facilities. And we employ a lot of people. We have taken people off the welfare rolls, and we have provided scholarship, job training, all of those opportunities that you want as a Anishinaabe to have the good life. And so I think when you look at that data, that collection, how important it is. And as an example, anytime I met with any elected official, I always brought all my data with me. If I was talking about housing, I would say how big the membership was and how many people are on the housing list. But here's what the funding did before, how many people we actually put in a house, and they were able to have that capacity for a house. And even working with some of the national organizations, NCAI, NAFOA, IGA, the local MAST, any of those organizations, is when we come together as a group, those numbers are pretty compelling of what we provide in our area, especially in the area of economic development. And so the best tool, I think, the data tool in today's environment, in my opinion, of course, is a strategic plan, because that strategic plan will establish what your roadmap is going to be, who needs to be with you as you're moving forward. And that strategic plan also brings the other elected officials together, and we align on what our mission is going to be. That strategic plan to the tribal membership allows them to know what the initiatives we're going to work on. And also working with your elected officials, that they also understand what you're doing as well. And I think about studying your enrollment rolls. How many do you have today? What's your projection of growth? Or how is it going to decline? How is that going to impact what your tribal budget is going to be? What is that going to impact if you have to increase your daycare? And what does that mean for scholarships and things of those sort? So there's all of this data is so pertinent to your everyday responsibility of providing for your membership. And not only your tribal membership, but the community that works with you on a lot of issues as well. And it was interesting, I was just at another conference in New Orleans, and there is an individual representing Fannie Mae, and he was bringing out his tribal initiative to the group, but there were no tribal representatives there except for me. And it was a housing finance agency. And so he and I talked, and I talked about the importance of going out there and making sure you're at the right area to provide the right data, so when you deal with tribes, you understand what the need is out there. So those are some of the small examples of why this data collection is so important and why you carry that with you to share wherever you go, and especially to your tribal members. I think, number one, you really have to make sure that they understand and they support, and you listen to their needs, and that's how you come up with your strategic plan to move the government forward on their behalf.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot there. Thank you for sharing that. So Dawson, I want to turn to you because Chief Executive Benjamin just talked about sort of initial data and really having an understanding of even basic things like treaties and boundaries, but also about how data can inform kind of what happens next and how you think about even telling the story or how you're charting your strategic direction going forward. Another group of people who are kind of avid consumers of data outside of government are investors, and your role in financial services. Can you tell us a little bit about what sort of data investors rely on when you're looking in your work? What kind of information are you looking for?
Great. Thank you so much, Aline, and it's great to be here. This might be the first panel that I've been on with someone from the Fed where we haven't got the disclaimer.
Oh. Maybe I should have provided a disclaimer. There's still time.
So it's great to be here. I think corporations and investors, as some of you know, use data to make decisions about where to allocate resources, right? Where do you want to put people? Where do you want to open up a branch? Things like that. And so data is really important for a business plan, right? And I think, when we think about Indian country, when we think about sort of the capital needs in Indian country, I think one of the things that's been very apparent to me as someone who's worked in financial services in Indian country for over 20 years is that, we don't just need funding in Indian country, right? We need capital, right? And to get capital, we need data, right? We need to show where the opportunities are in Indian country, because all of us who work with tribes, whether you're an elected tribal leader or you're providing a service to a tribe, we all know tribes are significant contributors to their local economies, right? And so I think we need that data to kind of show the people who aren't as familiar with us and who have capital that Indian country is a great place to invest in, right? And I think one good example of data that's being used right now by a lot of different types of organization is the data that's published by the National Indian Gaming Commission, right? Every year they publish their gross gaming revenues. I think it came out back in July. Tribally owned casinos generate almost $44 billion in revenue, right? And the most recent period they collected that data. And as a former gaming banker, I can tell you that, our team used that data to allocate as a part of our business plan when we asked for a piece of, my former employer's balance sheet, right, to finance tribal casino projects, right? And so that's data that the entire casino industry looks at and follows, right? And if you look at that data, you see growth, right? It's been growing consistently over, all the periods that NIGC has been collecting, that information. I mean, if you go back, you can actually see it's kind of maturing a little bit, right? But it's a powerful story, right? And that's the thing about data. Data is so powerful, right? When you compare sort of the gaming revenue that tribes contribute to the domestic casino, overall domestic casino revenue, it's almost 40%, right? Which is pretty incredible, right? And I live in Las Vegas. We're having more tribes come into Las Vegas. If you drive down the strip, you'll see the Guitar Tower Hotel going up. That's being built by the Seminole Tribe of Florida, right next to the old Mirage property, right? So tribes are playing a huge role in our economy, right? And if we think about like other data that we could include, right, and other things that just to go beyond casinos, because there's a lot of other needs in any country besides gaming. I think if we think about other data, we'd want that data to look like the NIGC data, right? It should be national in scope, right? So we see the overall picture of opportunity in any country. It should be respectful of an individual tribe's confidentiality and tribal sovereignty, right? I'm not getting up here and advocating, that we publish individual tribes, financial information, but I think NIGC has shown us that there's a way to show the opportunity while kind of protecting individual tribes. And, this, like I said, this data is powerful. It reframes the narrative, or it can reframe the narrative about tribes, right? And change the narrative from tribes always being poor, right, to tribes being significant contributors to their economy. It also just reframes the risk, right? Because, I think there's always this urban myth about tribes being, bad borrowers or, not able to kind of repay. But I think if you look at some of the default risk of, just kind of switching data sets. If you look at the default rates of borrowers at Native American CDFIs, they're lower, right, than commercial lenders, right, which is pretty amazing, right? And so data is so impactful, right? And I think the more data that we can get, I think is even better for investors and others who want to, put some money into Indian country.
Thank you for that. I'm going to press you guys in a minute about what more data, but before we do that, I want to ask Miranda as well. Last but certainly not least, really similar question about tribal councils and their enterprises. What data do they currently use? What would be especially valuable to add to the mix?
Yeah, I think data is such a powerful tool for modern tribal nations. The first data point is that tribal nations are modern. I think there is a tendency to think of tribal nations as a historical caricature almost. But tribal nations and their enterprises, that's another data point. Tribal nations have enterprises. Those enterprises are owned and operated by the government, sometimes under Section 17. I should mention I'm a recovering lawyer, so sometimes I slip into a little bit of legalese. But under Section 17 of the Indian Reorganization Act, tribes can engage in enterprises as governments. Why? Because tribes need governmental revenue. Why can't they access typical revenue sources like other governments? Because they can't tax property. Why is that? Because the U.S. holds tribal property in trust for tribes. Those are all data points that you have to start with. So what I find with tribal nations and enterprises today is that it's really a renaissance of us telling our own story. And that's so essential for the data. You look at something like casino data, a lot of times that was gathered by non-native entities, right? Non-native entities gather information about how many Native American people there are. Tribes, when they gather that information, they say, how many citizens of this particular tribe do we have? How many people within our tribe use our treaty rights? How many citizens do we have that live within or outside of the reservation boundaries? So when we collect our data, the data, to Casey's point, is much better quality because we actually know what information tells our story best. And so I've seen in the past few years a real opportunity that tribes are seizing to create that data. Now, once that data is out there, then you can actually go and tell stories about it, right? We actually have Native entrepreneurs that need capital. Before, it was like, well, why does Indian country need capital? Like, you're just, hunting and fishing, and you don't need that kind of funds. Oh no, we actually have businesses. Here's how many businesses we have. What is the market cap for Native youth and their interest in different things? None of that information existed. So to go to the financial institutions or to go as a tribal council to implement your strategic plan, you really had one hand tied behind your back because you couldn't really tell your story. The other thing that data does is that it legitimizes things. People didn't believe tribes when they told their story before. But if you could tell it in data, if you could partner with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis to get high quality, highly credible data, that data can then be used in a much better and a broader variety of ways. Just really quick, I think my favorite story about data right now is that if you go on any of the large language models and you say, show me a picture of a Native American, they will show you a picture of a person in buckskin and a headdress. And you say, no, that's not right. Show me a picture. Well, I should also say, don't log in, because they don't do that if you log in. But if you just use it without a login. No, show me a picture of a Native American in the modern world. And it'll show you that same person in buckskin and a headdress, but with like modern cities behind them, modern buildings. You say, no, show me a picture of a modern native tech entrepreneur. No lie, it shows you a person sitting at a desk with a computer with a headdress on. That is the kind of data, the kind of stories that are told about us. And we now have the opportunity to tell stories for ourselves. And I guarantee you what shows up in a native informed IA model won't have a headdress on.
So thank you for that. I feel like you opened up a whole nother realm of questions that I kind of wanted to get into, but I think maybe we'll go there now since you started to raise it. is the historical context, I think, being really an important part and also a theme in our conversations today of really even the things that you laid out as tribal nations have enterprises as governments. They have enterprises as governments to generate revenue because of the status of land, things like that that are important contextual elements. But also you talked a little bit about how tribes or how Native organizations might be pulling together their own data. I'd like to turn it over to Chief Executive Benjamin or Dawson to talk a little bit about, do you have examples of that as well, of like new innovations and kind of how people are thinking about data? Dawson, you also a moment ago spoke about, an element of some of the national data being that it was national, being that it still protected the sovereignty or the privacy rights of the tribal government or the enterprise that it was collecting data from. Things like that. Are there other elements of how that we should be thinking of in how we collect data?
Well, that's cheap.
Yeah, I think, when I think about opportunities in Indian country as a banker, right, I think about, also when I think about the requests that we get, right, because, tribes are unique. We aren't just sort of a racial category in the census, right? We have a political status. When we show up in the census, we have a political status, and within a bank, especially large banks, we tend to allocate capital based on industries, right? But tribes aren't really an industry, right? And when we think about sort of a government that owns businesses, right, you can't really put a tribe in a box. You can't put a tribe in a credit box, right? Because we're a government, and if you put a tribe on a government banking team, most other state and local governments don't have casinos, they don't have government contracting firms, right? They don't have, private equity or real estate, oil and gas, right? So they don't fit in that box, but they don't quite fit in a casino box, they don't quite fit into a government contracting box. And so to the extent that, we can get more data about some of these other industries that tribes are involved in, I think it makes it easier for, the people who have capital to understand how do they want to allocate the capital they have, right? Because a lot of investors, with large amounts of money will say, I want X amount to go into this fixed income security, and I want, this amount to go into this type of investment. And so to the extent that we can get more data about, the types of industries tribes are in, I think the better we are able to kind of match capital with the needs of Indian country.
So I'll use housing as an example. And Mille Lacs is 100 miles north, very rural, not a lot of housing stock. We have businesses that we need employees in. And so, of course, you have tribal housing, but non-Indians aren't allowed into that tribal housing. So looking at, and so I'm looking out in the audience and I see the experts that are here from Mille Lacs that did some of those projects. But how do we get the state of Minnesota to be a partner with us when we're trying to advance our housing and open it up for our workforce? And so just the data of where the people are traveling from. Many people come from Minneapolis and they drive up to Mille Lacs to work, or Brainerd or St. Cloud or wherever that would be, and the kind of housing, and compiling all that data that showed our partner, the state of Minnesota, that there is a huge need, and the impact that will have on these individuals. It saves time, of course, simple things like saving the time to get to work and back to work, that now they're able to spend more time with their family. They're happier, so they're better at work for that types of things. So just that simple thing of finding out what that individual is all about, and putting that in that data bucket to share with others, and the financing is very compelling. And that's what the finance folks, the government folks, whoever they need, that's what they need to know to support you and be a partner to make things better for people in the region, and for the reservation and those non-Indian partners and employees as well.
Dawson, did you want to jump in there? It looked like you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, I think housing is a great example of why we need economic data, right? If you look at the housing need in any country, right? And it depends on kind of like the source, but I've seen anywhere from $35 billion to $50 billion in housing needs in any country. Like that's more than like a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America can provide, right? You know, we need additional investors. They need to be able to see that tribal governments, individual tribal members are good borrowers, right? And so that's why we need this data about Indian country to kind of show like that Indian country is a good place to invest in, because it's, you know, the federal government has a trust responsibility in Indian country, but the federal government probably isn't going to give Indian country 35, you know, to $50 billion, right, for housing, right? So that capital needs to come from someplace, and I think having good data about, you know, the creditworthiness, you know, of tribal governments and individual tribal members, you know, can help there.
So I kind of want to push a little bit on that idea of just in terms of like promoting additional capital investment. Are there, especially Dawson, maybe in your space, and Miranda, just thinking about questions that you've gotten that you would like, myths that you would like to dispel about kind of investing in Indian country?
How much time do we have? Yeah, I think there are so many myths. There is so much. There is and I'm sure Melanie spent 20 years educating people. Every time they come in, you say, okay, this is what a tribe is, this is what our treaty is, this is what we do. So I think there are a tremendous amount of misinformation out there, even just about the most basic things. The status of tribes. You know, we will identify, oh, I'm a citizen of the Delaware Tribe of Indians for myself, what that political connection means. When non-Native people walk into Indian country, and often with a genuine desire to help or invest, there is a huge hurdle to doing so because of that misinformation. So I think the more that we can provide some initial data sets, the more we can provide some basic information about the fact that, you know, a lot of this is the work that the CICD does. Like, there are CDFIs. They have very great rates of return. There are Native entrepreneurs. There are this many acres of land. You know, like, just the most basic components of data, I think, would be really helpful. And then through that partnership, I've seen tribes be very successful in developing broader scopes of data that can translate out from maybe what a tribal council needs to what a bank needs or what a private investor might need. But it's really that partnership and starting with the tribe and addressing some of those key areas of misinformation, like the status of tribal nations. I think Dawson's note about where tribes sit within a company is very interesting, because they will often put tribes, you know, as a large consumer, right? Like they're a commercial account. Well, they don't really fit there. They're more a government, but they don't quite fit there because they also have commercials. So even just creating frameworks that help address where tribes sit, I think is a really helpful way to build the foundation for that relationship.
Yeah, I also think like data is a powerful way to just help educate, right? Because I feel like to be Native is to be an educator, right? Like regardless of whatever field, regardless of the field you work in, I think all of us probably spend a lot of time kind of educating our peers and our colleagues about Indian country. But I think to define sort of a set of information and to kind of share it is powerful, right? Because it's almost like math. You know how they always say math is like the international language, right? You know, I think to be able to have a set of information that other people can understand in an easy format, I think that's powerful, right? And again, to me, data is powerful because I think it reinforces tribal sovereignty, right? It helps educate people about tribal sovereignty and tribes as Indian people as with the political status as governments. But you know, there are so many myths about, you know, the creditworthiness of Native borrowers and, you know, just how unprofitable we are. But I think we've done a lot of internal research at Wells, and that hasn't been the case, right? Our clients are among the most profitable, right? And again, the CDFI default rates, right? Less than, you know, the default rates of mainstream and commercial banks, right? Super powerful.
Yeah, and so for those of you who aren't as familiar with community development financial institutions, can you talk a little bit maybe about some of the role that they might play?
So CDFIs, I think were formed, so I'm not a policy person, but I believe they were formed in the 90s, right? And many CDFIs are located in areas where a lot of mainstream financial institutions aren't able to or don't kind of have branches anymore, and they're fulfilling a lot of, kind of the functions that banks used to, right, in a lot of areas. And they've advanced to the point that there's like some pretty incredible and powerful CDFIs, out there. I was just here in Minneapolis last week at the ACES conference, talking to folks from Keepton, which is a native CDFI that focuses on lending to Native American farmers. Right? They started in South Dakota and they expanded nationally, and they're doing an incredible amount of work. And they have a loan portfolio of almost like $40 million. Right? Super, super powerful and doing such important work.
So some of that, switching gears a little bit to talk about some of our survey efforts, I think a particularly interesting facet of CICD's past work has been on the survey piece that Neil talked about a minute ago. Some examples of some of that past work include those pandemic surveys of tribal enterprises. We also have, to maybe Dawson's earlier point, amassed, this isn't supposed to be an advertisement for CICD's work, but a little bit of, to have a better understanding of all of those tribal enterprises and tribally owned enterprises and what fields they're in, what industries they're in, because it's far more diverse than many people might think. And now we have the Survey of Native Nations. What can I ask you guys for your opinion? What should CICD and other research institutes be prioritizing as they conduct surveys? As we think about the creation of kind of bespoke new data sources, what types of questions and who should we be asking? Who should we talk to? What are some of the things that you feel like would help to shape a deeper understanding of economic opportunity and economic prosperity? And as you guys are thinking about the answer to that question, I'll open it up. There are note cards in your folders. If you do have a question that you'd like to ask, feel free to write it down and somebody will collect it. And then I think Casey gave a shout out earlier for folks online. If you'd like to ask a question, we're collecting those as well.
I think the best place to go for what information and data Indian country needs is Indian country. I think, to Dawson's point, data is one of our sharpest and best tools to protect modern tribal sovereignty. And so starting with the sovereigns themselves, starting with tribal nations, we've heard some good examples. Oh, you want to put up a new hotel tower at your casino? What data do you need? Kind of working backwards. Oh, you want to develop better housing? What data do you need? Do you need data about certain economic ventures? Because whenever we go to non-native financial institutions or even the Hill or, where federal policy is made, which impacts all of Indian country, we often don't have those basic data tools that we need to support that effort, to guide that effort. In my practice, what I see a lot of is the modernization of tribal economies. And I do think CICD is doing a lot of that work already, but I know some of the most brilliant entrepreneurs in Indian country. I know some of the most incredible tribal nation businesses that are offering work in data, offering work in services online. That kind of functionality didn't really exist in tribal economies, I would say, 15, 20 years ago, but is an ever-growing area, particularly because so many tribes are rural. Online and digital services are really key. So I think to focus on what data Indian country needs, we need to think and hear from Indian country where they want to be in 10 years and work back from there.
Okay, I will. So that was, the only answer you could really have for this question when you think about it. And it is, I mentioned I was at another conference, and of course they were talking about Indian issues, and so I'm the only Indian in the whole place. So they come and talk to me. And but one of the things I stressed is that when you're dealing with tribes, they're unique, they're sovereign, and they have their own way of governance and their own goals for self-determination. And when you approach a tribe, at least do a little research on them, who they are. I mean, you can go on a website right now and find out a lot of information about any tribe. And to always, don't necessarily go there with you know it all kind of a mentality, because they'll just, you're shut down after a while and say, no, I don't want to deal with those people. They're too smart for me, so they can go somewhere else, kind of a deal. And then, you said it. We have the best experts right within our own communities. And those folks really, and I think about the Mille Lacs Band and our economic development arm, those individuals spend so much time researching, vetting projects, looking at all the financial availability to do a project. And a lot of times, of course, you always want to go to the tribal council, and sometimes you don't get there to find out what those experts and what kind of knowledge they have to share when you're dealing with outside entities. So to set up who those folks are as well. And but again, you can have the best relationship with the staff, but if you don't have that good relationship with your tribal council, your elected officials, things may not move forward.
Oh, Miranda.
I just want to jump in because I think you make two really important points. The first being that tribes are political entities and they are not all the same. So just like you wouldn't expect California and North Dakota to address a single problem the same way, we have our Californias and our North Dakotas, or probably more appropriately, we have our Spains and our Germanys, even though they're all a part of the EU. And subject to EU law. We're all subject to federal Indian law, but we have different governmental ethos, structures, and priorities. So that's going to really differ with each tribe you work with. And I just think that's such an important point for folks that are coming in. The other thing that you mentioned is that you always have someone coming in. Deal flow is not an issue in Indian country. If you sit on a tribal council, there is someone there every month telling you that they have the thing that is going to change your tribe for the rest of time. It's the best thing. Deal flow is not, it is like Shark Tank sitting on a tribal council half the time. You always have someone coming in. The difference is that you sometimes don't have the data to be able to identify really what is a good investment, and you have a limited amount of time and money. So how do you prioritize these life-changing potential options that are walking in the door? And so when folks approach tribal councils, you really, have to be focused on the long term with a political entity, which everyone in the US knows that political entities can be a little crazy sometimes. So you're going to have to be mindful of that, but you're going to have to really put that effort in, like you said, to work with the staff, to work with the council, and to develop that relationship over time.
I agree with both of the comment around just going to Indian country and asking tribal leaders. But I also think we need to acknowledge, like, if we want capital from elsewhere, right, we also need to kind of understand that mainstream America, not just Native America, is also going to be a user of this data, right? And so to me, it would be interesting to kind of have a conversation with tribal leaders and maybe like folks from the rating agencies, right? Because they're always thinking about investors and their rating debt, right? So it might be interesting to kind of think about what would they say, or about what investors are interested in, what kind of data, would they want to see, right? So I think, as we think about, data in Indian country, certainly, we always need to go to Indian country first, but we also need to acknowledge that there are going to be other users, and if we want more capital, we need to consider those users as well.
Chief Executive Benjamin, can I just hit on this deal flow Shark Tank experience that you've had? And how would you evaluate something that comes forward?
I would send it over to the economic development arm of the tribe. But one example is an individual tribal member had some relationship with these potential business people that wanted to do research for pig hearts. And they came to Mille Lacs Reservation, and the individuals, they brought a packet, and it was interesting, they didn't even have any information about them individually, who they were, what kind of background they had forward. And the thing that really jumped out at me and stays with me forever is that the statement was, well, you're a tribe and you're sovereign, so you can do whatever you want. And so therefore, bring us on, we're gonna do this research on the pig hearts, and we're gonna have jobs and this and that. And without the knowledge that tribes have laws, and we have policy and procedure, and we do wanna vet anything that comes through. And I think there was, just to your comment, that I think there was like 1,000 potential businesses coming through the corporate commission on a monthly basis or something. And so we looked at, what are we good at? You know, we're not good at being pig heart researchers, so that's not gonna be a deal we're gonna have. But, you know, what are we good at? And looking at that past data, what's the most profitable way for us to move forward? Financial data and things of that sort. So that's when you think about it, and it's like the definition of a tribe in a business world for some of those individuals, that you're sovereign, so you can do whatever you want. So my idea is what you want to do, kind of a thing.
That's super interesting. I know we have about 10 minutes left, and I see that there are some questions that have come in. So Andy, do you want to read one of them?
Sure. So there's been several questions that have been submitted. This one is for Dawson, although it'd be interesting to get everybody's perspective on this. There's been a surge in tribes doing economic impact reports over the past few years. Do you pay attention to them, and are they useful?
I do pay attention to them. I think a lot of them are important, and I think a lot of them focus on sort of the regions where they come from. A lot of them have sort of a casino focus and origin to them, right? And so I think that's important, but you know, I think there's an opportunity, I think, to kind of do more. So.
Nice. Want to do one more?
Sure. Indian country is a young population. Beyond hard data, how have any of you thought about engaging youth in a visioning exercise, letting them tell us what they see, say, in 50 years?
So for Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, we used to do community surveys, and of course our elders and our youth were the focus. And we look at what are their, especially the youth, what are their aspirations and hopes. And so when you look at that, you set up scholarship programs, you set up mentor programs, you set up on-the-job training for these youth to be able to move forward and set up in our corporate commission. I talked about where are the tribal members? Why aren't they in management decisions at a level they should be? And so what happens is that our commissioner creates 10 new positions at director level to give individuals or tribal members the opportunity to learn the economic development business. And so depending on what your skill base is, you might be required to take additional education, or do you have the education, you just need the on-the-job training. And setting up programs where you send your youth out constantly to look at the world and see what it is and what they want to do, and then follow them through scholarships, through, like I mentioned, the mentorship. And also, I think with the elder population is they keep us grounded, and they remind us of our responsibilities, and they tell us as well as that each of us have a gift. The Creator gave us a gift. It's our responsibility to share that gift. So they keep us grounded in making sure that we remember our responsibilities as who we are as Anishinaabe.
Thank you. Do either of you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to listen to our youth, right? I mean, if you think about sort of the great movements, not only in Indian country, but just beyond. I think so many of them started, from students, right? I mean, if you think about Standing Rock, right? That was youth-led, right? You think about the civil rights movement, right? That was like, started by, African-American youth, right? And I just think there's so much power in kind of our young people and their ability to, shape the future for all of us and follow kind of the ideals that they have. So I think,
I wanted to
Go
add
ahead,
real
please.
quick, because I forgot to mention this when we were doing the community surveys, we did the elders and the youth. And the top request that they wanted to see was the cultural language revitalization and having the ability to practice their ceremony. And that always said, I thought, wow, so that meant there was such a good connection from our youth to our elders for them both to have that as the highest priority.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So I'm going to try to summarize our conversation. But you're going to have to forgive any omissions because this is all in real time. I feel like we've had a really broad-ranging and substantive conversation. I'm so grateful to have all three of you on this panel. We started by talking about what is the first data. Chief Executive Benjamin, you talked about even treaties and boundaries and how you as council members or you as tribal leaders are thinking about the information that comes forward and how do you take basic information like enrollment and housing and needs and develop plans. And ultimately, that was a theme that we heard from Dawson as well, is you really ultimately need to be able to have a plan to how you allocate resources, relying on basic data, but also recognizing that Indian country is not a place that just needs funding, also has a need for capital, and that the role that tribal governments play in their in community is as an economic driver, as a major employer, as a hub, and also recognizing that over time that the historical context that where we've been is really important for understanding kind of modern nations and a modern understanding of tribal governments and Native people. So I think a lot of those themes are, I think, very interesting in how we think about telling stories and how we think about collecting information. We also talked about the how. We talked about information needing both at the local level or at the tribal community in Indian country as we think about collecting information, but also are there other users of this data in terms of investors potentially or other people that might be able to have a deeper, a more nuanced understanding of where might there be opportunities for additional partnership investment in communities. I also thought it was interesting kind of at the end where we're talking about just the different audiences kind of riffing again on that theme of even the investors as you're thinking about community and youth in the future. And I feel like that's the kind of my last question for all of you as you leave this panel and you have one takeaway that people can walk away from this conversation with. What's the one thing that you would want them to take away, the one thing that you could potentially fix if you had a magic wand? Chief Executive Benjamin, I'll start with you.
I think the recognition of tribes as sovereigns, inherent sovereigns, and so we determine our own destiny. And we do and want partners because when we're successful, everybody is successful. And I think it always behooved me to see the local counties fighting us on our governance issues when the county people work for us, when we provide a good living salaries for them and health insurance and scholarship opportunity. And so that respect is that our goal is to really be self-determined about who we are, and we know what and who we want to be, and we'll always have that opportunity to move forward. And if you want to come along as a partner, we're willing.
Thank you. Dawson?
Love your comment. I think I would say let's use data. Let's use data to kind of reframe the storytelling about our communities, right? And let's reframe it and move it from sort of the poverty narrative to one of tribes as being, tribal communities, Indian country being, significant economic operators in the communities, where they're located. To your point, major employers. Places like Minnesota, tribes are huge philanthropic donors to the local community. I know, like Shakopee, I think if you read their report, they've given over $300 million, right, to the local, community organization. So let's use data to kind of retell that story.
Thank you. I think, yeah, second both of those. Framing, if there's anything I would add to it, I would identify tribal nations as re-emerging markets. There's this concept in economics of emerging markets, right? They're growing, they're often youth-focused. I think tribal nations are re-emerging markets, and the reason I say re-emerging is because we have already emerged. We have a long history of emergence, and have a strong knowledge base and foundation from which we grow on. But I think for modern, investors, financial economists, data scientists, it's really important that they understand that we are re-emerging, that we're not antiquated, that we're not a figment of the past, that we are modern, and that Indian country is an opportunity. Not a loophole opportunity, as some pig heart research scientists felt, but that is an opportunity to work with a sovereign to develop an area or an economy, and that with that understanding, because how do you approach an opportunity? It's not with hesitation, it's with excitement, it's with curiosity. So I wish people would just approach tribal nations in Indian country with excitement and curiosity, and build that data and understand that our sovereignty is something we care deeply about and will be thoughtful about, but that we want to see flourish in the future. And with those things in mind, I think the partnerships and the possibilities really are endless.
Well, please join me in thanking this esteemed panel. Thank you so much for your insights.
What a wonderful panel. Just wanted to reflect on Dawson's point. To be native is to be an educator, and to be able to educate, I think in the modern day, we need to have high quality data to do that well. So incredible discussion. At this time, it's my honor to introduce a fireside chat between Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari and United States Senator Tina Smith from here in Minnesota for a conversations from the Capitol discussions. We are just incredibly grateful to Senator Smith for taking time from her schedule in Washington, D.C. to be a part of this event, and we all have the opportunity to watch it on the big screen.
Public safety. Senator Smith, on behalf of all of us here at the Minneapolis
What an incredible conversation. We're certainly lucky to have Senator Smith share her time and her wisdom after her decades of doing work in Indian country. And I particularly appreciated that phrase of the richness of now. So again, that blends perfectly into our theme for our 10th anniversary of bringing our past into our present and our future. So thanks again to Neil and to Senator Smith. Our next panel is going to focus on economic innovations in Indian country, and I'd like to invite Dr. Alicia Murphy, again, who is an economist with the Navajo Nation and a member of CICD's Leadership Council, to introduce the next panel.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Yat Eshe Alicia Murphy Nishiaki Ani Nishle Hanagahni Bashichin Toglini Dashache Zaiskini Dashanella. I am coming from Navajo Nation. I live in Gallup, New Mexico, but I work out of Winter Rock, Arizona, which is the capital of Navajo Nation. I am the current economist for the Navajo Nation Division of Economic Development. It is the first position we've had at the tribe as an economist, so very, very honored to serve in this role for my nation. It's been a goal of mine to work for my tribe after school. So after completing years of school, it was my goal to come back to my nation and work. So I'm glad to be in this space and glad to join this network and, of course, join the work of what CICD does. Okay, so I'm going to come introduce the panel. First, we have Corey Blankenship. He is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, has dedicated over 17 years to serving his tribe and community through leadership roles in the nonprofit, tribal finance, and philanthropic sectors, and is currently the executive director of NAFOA, which is the Native American Finance Officers Association. Prior to joining NAFOA, Blankenship has served as community investment officer of Dogwood Health Trust, focusing on fostering economic opportunities related to social determinants of health. Here's Corey. Next, we have Chris James, the president and CEO of the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. Chris has worked with the National Center and brought it into the 6th decade. Is that?
I haven't worked there for 6
No,
decades.
but you.
But I have
Yeah. Sorry, thank you. Under James's leadership, the National Center has increased focus on international trade. It also serves as a connector between corporate America and Native-owned businesses seeking to enter into our supply chains. As a former senior official at the U.S. Department of Treasury and the Small Business Administration, he has expertise in government contracting, access to capital, and business issues, and more. Next, and certainly not least, Amber Schulz-Oliver, Executive Director of the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians. Amber is the Executive Director of AT&I and has established firm roots in Portland, Oregon. AT&I is an organization dedicated to promoting self-determination and sovereignty and serves 57 tribal nations in the Pacific Northwest. She serves on the boards for several organizations, including the Potlatch Fund, an eco-trust community development entity. She is committed to environmental stewardship, sustainability, and service to the Native community. Welcome, our panelists. So as we get started, and as we go into the topic of innovations in Native economies, I would like to ask Ms. Amber to give us some recent economic projects in Indian country that would provide us examples of tools available to tribes as they work in economic development.
Yeah, thanks for that. I keep going back and forth on what I wanted to talk about today. Certainly the panel is about innovations in economic development. And there were 3 that I came up with, and one of them is not very recent, but I can hear my elder still yelling in my ear, use the treaties as an economic development tool. And if we think of economy as being a tool to support our communities, the treaties really outline those non-negotiables, right? There are certain things that have been reserved to make sure that the U.S. government is held accountable to make sure that those things remain in place for tribal communities in perpetuity. So, yeah, my elder, Antone Minthorn, just turned 91 this year. I think a lot of you guys know Antone. We had a birthday party for him. You know, and he's done a lot in his community, and he really sits on that the treaties really were a valuable tool in that development. You know, another one, a little bit more recent, but still not super recent, is the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. Sovereignty is expensive, and you know, all tribes want to exercise sovereignty differently and in accordance with their own priorities, but you need funding for that. And I have an anecdote from a planner I was talking to a couple of years ago, and he said, you know, Amber, the planning department of this tribe is twice as large as it was for the whole tribe 20 years ago. And that's just an incredible amount of growth in a short amount of time to really be able to start exercising sovereignty the way you want to, not just to subside. And the final one I came up with has been mentioned many times during this data summit, which is the CDFIs. Certainly there's a lot of research and evidence that a robust and healthy private sector is key in developing Native communities, including tribal economies. The development of on-reservation private sectors can counter job stagnation, economic leakage, and the ability to dream and innovate. But it's hard to start a business. You need financing with people that don't usually have access to the traditional forms of financing, which is your rich uncle, if anybody has rich uncles that they can borrow money from, mortgaging your house, or drawing from your savings. So the CDFIs live in your communities, they know who you are, and they're able to make loans on pretty creative collateral and sometimes on trust-based. But I think beyond just the financing, it's also the technical assistance. So how do you do a market study? How do you advertise your business? And so these really essential institutions, I think, have been incredibly useful for developing the on-reservation private sector.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. And that sets a stage for this conversation and the rest of the questions we'll be going through. So I want to go to Corey. Can you provide a few examples of how tribes used new and creative tribal public finance tools to help tribal economies grow?
Certainly. So is my microphone on? Can you hear that? Okay. So in my work with NAFOA, I've had the opportunity to visit with tribal leaders across the country who are leveraging some of the public finance tools to build essential infrastructure within their communities. And by doing that, they're able to support economic development initiatives. And one of our goals at NAFOA is to help build a policy landscape that will support more tribes having access to those programs. So two that really kind of resonate with me and I think are examples for any tribal leaders who are in the room are access to things like new market tax credits and the low-income housing tax credit. These credits are an opportunity for tribal nations to leverage outside investment in their communities by offering a tax credit to those investors, oftentimes over like a 10-year time horizon. And so I think that the first panel really set it up nicely for us when they talk about, and even in the comments from the senator, tribes having the entrepreneurial spirit where they're able to piece these various funding mechanisms together in order to fund a larger, more robust project. And so we actually highlighted two projects at our most recent conference with NAFOA, and that was the Washoe Tribe of California and Nevada and their use of the low-income housing tax credit program to leverage not only housing for their tribal citizens, but also for the larger workforce for the economic development projects that they were doing. and also the Colville Confederated Tribes in Washington State and their use of the New Market Tax Credit Program. I think one of the challenges with those two programs is that it requires a level of sophisticated operations in order to access those and to use those effectively and to report on those programs in a way that will maintain compliance and allow you to use those programs again and again. But for the tribes that really understand, seek to understand, that they build the knowledge, they build the internal capacity, they identify the right partners, they're able to use those programs again and again to build various projects. And so I think Colville was a good example where they built a community center and then they said, we're moving to our next project, which is going to be housing development, which is going to be administrative offices, which is going to be space for our federal contracting arm, so that they're able to use those resources again and again by developing that internal expertise. We recognize at NFOA that, gaming tribes versus non-gaming tribes, or tribes that have the human capital to pull off a project like that versus tribes that do not. And one of the things that is really interesting to me at NFOA is what are the opportunities for tribes to work together? If I gain that expertise, I gain that knowledge, how do we build some consortium, some cohorts that are able to leverage those resources? And then from a NFOA policy and advocacy perspective, what are we doing in talking with senators, with our House representatives to say we need increased access to these programs? So I think there's a delicate balance there. You're right. We can ask for increased access. We can ask for set-asides for tribes, but we also have to be able to use them. And one of the challenges that I think that we run into is that we ask for a set-aside and it's granted, and then it's so complicated that tribes can't actually utilize it. Yeah. And so then we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot because we say, we gave you this $20 million set-aside and nobody applied for it, or a $2 billion set-aside and nobody applied for it. Well, because it was so incredibly difficult to navigate that once it was actually in place, it was hard for our tribes to be able to access that and to feel comfortable that we could do it in a way that was compliant. So I think from a NFOA perspective, we are working with our partners, working with our allies, working with the regional organizations to say, how do we develop good policy, but also how do we build capacity across Indian country to be able to execute on these things?
I just want to touch on that a little bit from my experience in witnessing building new programs around the State Small Business Credit Initiative program. That is an organization, or that is an initiative that wasn't initially gone through and gone forward with tribes in mind. So tribes coming into this game at the middle of, at halftime, Treasury had to come to the table, tribes had to come to the table, organizations had to advocate for these tools, and maybe it was extra time to understand Treasury's requirements as well as the tribe's obligations to its citizens in their own policies and procedures, and like writing its own lending codes and stuff like that. So that's what we, building capacity around policy, around new policy, around new initiatives. And then this question's for Chris. What are your thoughts on these recent developments in Native-led businesses? For example, what are something that you've seen in new industries in Native-led businesses what are they entering into?
Great. Well, thank you, Alicia. I did want to, first, it's so great to look around the room and see so many familiar faces. I've been involved with the center for a very long time, and it's just amazing. So I commend the work that was done. Casey, great work. It's been wonderful being part of the organizations. It's been great. Every time I get to come to one of these gatherings, it's a lot like a reunion, and we're talking. It's like, I haven't seen you in so long, and it's just so great to see so many people. And of course, Corey and Amber, we've known each other for a very long time. Corey and I have actually known each other probably all of our lives, so it's really great. I did want to just touch base on the one question around the state small business, because NFOA and the National Center, as well as NCAI, we advocated very hard to get that program implemented, and going to the Hill, making sure that it was included in that particular bill. One of the challenges was that we have with oftentimes the federal government is that once even we advocate, we get the funding authorized, but then there's resistance from internally, in this particular program, internally at Treasury. So they're like, well, we don't know what to do with the tribes. And so there's always a big education piece. I know the last panel talked about it, but there's always this piece of like, it's not like for that particular program, the states had been already doing that program for a decade, and then the tribes all of a sudden get the access to the program that we well deserve. Because again, a lot of times that program, states were saying that they were going to do tribal programs and they never would do it. So that particular program having access, but some of those roadblocks was actually who is awarding the program. So to talk about businesses, absolutely, Paul. Look at that. So I'm glad I have a large. Oh, it's green. That's it. Green means it works. Yeah, it's like every time you start a Zoom call, you have to turn on the mic. So thank you, Paul, for doing that. I run the National Center for American Indian Enterprise Development. We work with clients. We have about 4,000 clients nationwide. We work with in various stages of business. A lot of our clients are tribal enterprises, and we are supporting those infrastructure, supporting the tribes, doing all different types of innovation, which Corey's mentioned and Amber has mentioned as well. The individual business owners, the diversity of what they're doing is amazing, and what we're seeing around technology, what we're seeing around partnering with maybe a larger corporation to do a project. Innovative farming. I'm seeing a lot in the agriculture section where individuals are going back to their roots and building infrastructures around farming or other types of agriculture type products. Infrastructure projects. We have construction companies. I'm giving you all those examples because oftentimes we face this challenge of people don't really understand the diversity of Indian country and how diverse our business is, and how we have economic leakage from the reservations, where we see a lot of folks living off the reservations, building businesses off reservations, because oftentimes that's where the markets are. However, how do we continue to build reservation-based businesses, or at least continue to build those economies? Our entrepreneurs are also being very innovative about doing that. So to answer your question, just the diversity of our businesses is driving our economies nationwide.
I like that setup to a thought I've had since coming into this world of tribal economic development as a student. And I've been told for years that tribal nations have to be creative in solutions. So coming up with the creative solutions become a love-hate relationship in my brain, because we're in systems that are not for us, not built by us. But we are doing that now with collecting data, with building capacity in professions where Native people and Indigenous people are not common. So I do see all the time how much diversity is a part of our who we are, filling a gap, filling a need, filling spaces that we need to be heard, to be serving our own communities.
And having that internal, like the last panel talked about, that internal power, the internal expertise. 20, 30 years ago, yes, we had a lot of experts come out from the community. Now, and you're a prime example, Alicia, of having the knowledge internally, and I think that is such a power and such an exercise of our own sovereignty to have our own power to do this, and that includes the businesses.
Thank you. Would you guys like to add anything to that question and what you see Native-led businesses doing in innovative spaces right now?
I think one of the things that I see in my own community, and this ties to the work that I did with impact investing and grant making, is not thinking about business development, economic development in our community as every investment has to be a home run, right? Or every enterprise has to be a multi-million or a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. So working in the tribal government for 12 and a half years, like I felt like we had it pretty well figured out, right? Like, and that when folks didn't know how to use our systems, that was their fault, not our fault, because we had explained it so well. Once I stepped out of that role and was on the outside looking in, I was like, wow, we made that really really complicated. You know, thinking about some of the processes that we had utilized, and so I think that there's an opportunity there for Native-owned businesses. Doesn't always mean tribal-owned business, right? And there's an opportunity to resurrect this entrepreneurial spirit in our communities and allow our people to serve their communities without being on the inside of that tribal government. And I think that stepping out of that too also helped me to realize that a lot of times we are taking systems that aren't built for us and we're replicating them, and then we're doing it to ourselves, right? And we're killing that creativity that really could be unleashed within our communities to do good for a lot of people. And when I went into the private foundation, you know, we had an opportunity. It was a large foundation. We're talking about a $2 billion foundation that served an 18-county area that was very rural, and it just so happened that our reservation was part of that 18-county area. So we're talking about you know, $75 million a year of grant making into an 18-county region. So we're pushing money out the door in the form of grant making and impact investing. And it just was really eye-opening to me to see these 2- and 3-person nonprofit organizations in small rural communities that had stood up co-working space because it was the only location that had broadband. And they were supporting local makers who were selling their products on Etsy and then coming to the community center twice a week and using the community center as their packaging and shipping location. And they were sending their invoices from the community center, and they were receiving payment through the community center because that was their connection with that larger marketplace. So it was really eye-opening to me to see the potential about how you can invest in these small entrepreneurial endeavors in tribal communities and how impactful they can be.
Yeah, I have, my brain kind of goes 2 places at once. You know, the first one is that, especially in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of the businesses that are tribal citizen owned are kind of more natural resource based and based on traditional economies, right? So a lot of fishing. You know, we also have, you know, timber fellers. And, you know, so I think that also we're seeing a lot of artisans and makers. And I think that there's kind of this freedom to feel like you can enter into a business that is culturally rooted and really advances how you want to engage with the world, right? Or how a tribal citizen wants to engage with the world and feel like they can make a business out of it. And so that was one thing that I think is really, really beautiful. And the other place I go is, again, I have these tribal leaders yelling in my head. This one's Ron Allen. You know, he says all tribes are aiming to be self-sufficient. So the tribal enterprises that are engaging in or energy sovereignty, buying dams, developing a grid, you know, and other utilities, you know, water, water sovereignty. And, you know, I think that, again, this using economy to exercise sovereignty in the ways that are most important to our communities. It's really, I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Thank you. That takes us into our next question for the whole panel, and I'll let you all decide who wants to go first, but where do you see tribal economies in the next 10 years from now? And what do you hope will happen? And what are you also concerned about in the next 10 years? It's a big question.
It's a great question. You know, if we look historically, if we look back over the past 30 years, the advancements in economic development is, you know, and Corey, you probably have the data on it, but it's like 20 folds. I mean, there is what we, how our communities have continued to evolve with or some communities, I can't say all communities, but communities that have really benefited from gaming has continued to build upon that. That's not every community. And all of us in this room that works in and around Native communities or Indian country, we know that oftentimes there's still a lot of communities that especially more rural communities that are still struggling a little bit. And how do we equalize that? So what opportunities are there in rural communities that we can continue to build upon and continue to expand their economies well beyond, if they don't have gaming, what other diverse economies? And I think we have seen a lot of our communities embrace their own enterprises beyond gaming. And I think that will continue to increase, where our tribes will continue to look, in Alaska, we all know the Alaska Native corporations, how they've really used government contracting, but then they would do hospitality, and maybe they would do some natural resources. So that diversity of enterprises in a tribe will continue to grow. And I think we will continue to see a lot of our communities that historically might have been underserved come out of that because of their ability to build enterprises and just the changing world of technology on how we can, we're not geographically stuck in one location. So I think that'll continue to build. Where I do see some of the challenges, the partnership with the federal government, I think will always be a challenge. There are some positive partners that we have at times, but in general, over my 20 years of advocacy, the federal government often is a challenge because of the not quite understanding sovereignty, not quite understanding, what tribes' power is. And I think that'll continue regardless of what administration is in power, who's in Congress, but there still is always a little bit of, always will be a tension there, and that'll continue over the next decade plus, in my opinion.
I think that my hope for tribal economies would be that they would have access to the tools and resources and the capacity to be where they want to be and where is right for their community. And I think that as I look back over my career, we were very quick to say, oh, look at what this tribe and what they're doing, and we need to be just like that, and we could have that. And a lot of times it was kind of a slap in the face. It's like, well, we can't do that because we're not structured in a way that would support that decision-making model, and that would give leadership a comfort level with how that entity is being run and how it's being managed. If I think about my own tribal community, we're very fortunate to be the southern gate to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the most visited national park in the national park system, with 13 million visitors last year. And we know about 3.5 million of those visitors use our reservation to access the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. At the same time, when we think about economic challenges, my uncle Kenny was executive director of the museum, and he's saying 3.5 million people drive by my door and only 80,000 of them stop every year. They're like, what are we doing wrong that not more people are stopping in to explore our culture and stopping in for that history lesson. And I think there's some good examples of data that we have access to and questions that need to be answered. But I know too, within my own community, we've been a tourism economy. We've been very fortunate to be situated in an area that is rural and beautiful, but also fairly easily accessed, and so we can attract visitors. But I know that over the last several decades, we have looked to neighboring towns and cities and said, well, look at how they're doing, look at the number of visitors they have, and we need to be just like that. And I think that, interestingly, we heard that for a long time, right? We need to be just like this other community. And then we finally had somebody say, why? Like, I don't think that I want the traffic or the congestion or the population or the hassle that comes with being that community. Like, we could be a much quieter, a much tranquil visitor experience. And so I think that that's something that we can deliver on. And I think that Chief Executive Benjamin touched on this too. It's like, what's the why behind why we're developing the enterprise? You know, what's the reason that we're going into this business? And one of the things that was interesting for me coming from Eastern Band was we were always thinking about economic development as revenue protection, right? That we need to diversify, we need to go into other industries because we've gotten used to a certain level of revenue, and we need to make sure that we can always protect that level of revenue. Talking to other tribal leaders across the country, some of them aren't concerned about revenue generation necessarily. They're saying my number one reason for economic development is job creation. I need places for people to work so that we can develop good housing so that they have stable incomes. And so I think for each community, it's understanding why you're going in that direction. What values can you bring to that business, to that enterprise? And I think I was doing an adult leadership program, and it's when we were having a debate in our community about developing a water park project, right? You know, 250 keys, 300 employees, and 50,000 square feet of just great water park space to attract families to come and stay and play in Cherokee. And I remember talking about this with a leadership development group that was not part of my community. And this one lady said, I don't think you should do it. And I was like, oh, why? Why? And she said, I don't think that you can make it enough of your own to warrant doing it, right? That you're just going to feel like every other water park that someone can go to. And so I think that that's really an interesting comment, is how do you make that enterprise enough of your own that you feel like you can, that you have true ownership of it as a tribal nation?
Thank you. Amber?
Yeah, 10 years. I'm struck by what you said, Chris, about, there's some tribal economies that have been able to grow very, very fast, and there's others that really haven't had some of those opportunities. And we're also seeing a changing world. We're seeing a lot more tools in AI. We're seeing a lot more ability to work remotely, and some other opportunities with large land bases, right? And so maybe in the next 10 years, some of these tribes might find new industries, new technologies that might help, kind of create that boon, right? But I do like this idea of what can tribes learn from each other? Was there enterprises that, whether they're being successful or not, that you can learn? It's like, is this right for our community, or is this? That's nice that you guys are doing it. We're going to go do something else over here. But then I also want to touch on what we were saying about tribes moving towards self-sufficiency, and this has to go with some of my concerns. Self-sufficiency does not mean that the U.S. government gets out of its trust responsibility. And so that's the concern I see, is just making sure that holds true, that tribes do feel empowered to be self-sufficient while still holding U.S. government accountable.
I heard from all three, I heard very powerful things about staying true to the identity of every community, because all of our tribal nations are different, but making sure that we operate and support businesses that operate in encouraging and supporting that unique identity, making sure that our federal government stays held accountable, but also learning from each other, which is why this is such a great gathering here. This is a great day and a half of discussions. But in these 10 years, how do you see what you just mentioned, how data impacts those, how it could help any tribal nation reach that next level?
I started last time.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Well, I've been fortunate enough to work with the CICD on the second iteration of their survey of Native nations, and so we've had a lot of conversations with the economists here, and I think so much of it really is about those data stories, and that's come up time and time again, but I don't think it can be underscored enough that we try, as you know, tribes know what's going on in their communities, but having, I guess, lack of a better word, that proof, right? Or those real impact stories to show really what's happening. You know, data's data. You know, data doesn't have any emotion. You know, you can't make, it doesn't think on its own. It's, well, I was going to say it's not political, but I'm not sure that's true.
It's starting to think on its own.
It's starting to, yeah, that's going to, well, that's a different panel, right? So yeah, I think that data is just, the one thing that I'm so excited about this Survey of Native Nations project, but I think the one place where I feel a little sad is that all we can do is start from where we are. I think our stories are more powerful if we're able to show, you know, where we've been, where we're coming, and kind of show where our growth trajectory might be. And I think we have some of those stories anecdotally, but we don't have the hard numbers to show that. So I think starting today and building that data set is crucially important for our storytelling and for knowing what's next, knowing what's coming.
Chris or Corey?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Amber on this, and I also think the work that has occurred with data around businesses and impact, the trickle-down effect of communities. Because where we're still having to continue to advocate and educate is making sure people understand, and I'll use it since the Eastern Band's a great example, that they're the #1 employer of Western North Carolina. They employ what, 8,000 people, Corey? In an area that maybe max has about 50, 60,000 people. And that's just one example. The economic impact on how much revenue the tribes bring into a state. Oklahoma is a perfect example from just gaming alone, and this is a little dated statistic, but it's like $36 billion in one state of revenue just from gaming. Doesn't include all the enterprises that those, so that, you know, where I think data can be useful, and we shouldn't always have to prove ourselves, which is constantly having to show that but where it is saying that it could be an aha moment for some people that really don't realize that trickle-down effect, or really don't realize the impact that the tribe has in a region or in a state. And I think that is something that we need more of. Every state needs a tribal impact study, you know, with every enterprise, including gaming. And I know that's a big lift, Casey, but you know, showing how that, because we're constantly having to educate
everyone else on that impact. And I think that's the importance of it and why we need to continue to focus and build more upon and support more data to show that impact and really show the strength, continued strength of our communities.
And I think going back to the why in terms of what data would be important is allowing each of the tribal nations to determine what data is important for the enterprises and the economic development that they're doing, right? Is it jobs created? Is it number of enrolled members in jobs? Is it median income of the region? Is it unemployment of the region? That is the primary driver, and that one economic entity may look different than another economic entity because we're standing them up for different purposes. We look at, and going back to Eastern Band as an example, a lot of times gaming can kind of taint your view of what economic success looks like because it's such a quick win in most instances, right? And I know that we were often struggling with our tribal leadership when we would bring a business proposition to the table, and they'll look at it and say, well, what do you mean it only generates $20 million a year? And I'm like, $20 million a year is a good shot in the arm, right? And it's like, well, we've got this entity up here, and they're distributing 10 times that. And I think that being able to define what that looks like, and that there's no one-size-fits-all model for what that looks like across Indian country, being able to differentiate what that looks like. But I think going back to the data perspective too, is being able to communicate with our state and local and federal counterparts to really make our position clear. And I know that not all tribes have relationships with their states like we did at Eastern Band with the state of North Carolina, where we could, just as an example, we had some counties that were trying to assess taxes, business personal property taxes on non-tribally owned businesses that were on our reservation. And so they say, well, as a matter of federal law, they're subject to taxation even though they're on your tribal lands. And our argument was, yes, but you don't provide them with any services, right? That when they call for police assistance, it's tribal police. When they have an issue with their parking lot, it's tribal construction or the tribal Department of Transportation. You're not providing their water. You're not providing their sewer. You're not providing any infrastructure connectivity to these businesses. We're doing all of that. And so we actually went to the state of North Carolina and said these counties are coming in and trying to assess this business personal property tax. And we're not asking for your permission. We're asking you to recognize the tribe's sovereignty, and we're asking you to recognize the tribe's sovereign authority to levy taxes. Will not create an environment that is competitive so that we're attracting more business to the reservation than what the county could potentially attract. We'll charge the same rate, but those revenues should come to the tribe and not to the county. And the state agreed, right? And they passed our taxation bill that allows us to levy those taxes on the reservation again. And the language of that bill I'm really proud of, because the first line of that bill states that Eastern Band of Cherokee Indian is an inherently sovereign nation with inherent sovereign authority, right? That this is not the state of North Carolina granting permission. This is the state of North Carolina recognizing your sovereignty and recognizing the economic impact that you're having on the region, and saying, this is okay.
I have one more comment to add, and I think one of the stories that can be told through data is that tribes and Native people are a modern people. And I'm struck by the imagery from the previous panel of the headdress in every picture. And I think that there's a lot of assumptions of tribes and gaming and how money is spent. And I think that these data stories can show that, a lot of these funds are used to exercise all elements of government, and maybe it'll demystify some of those assumptions.
Yeah, thank you. I keep going back to, just a quick story before we have the last few minutes, but I keep going back to when I'm a student. This is all the things that I've read about in books, like, or heard of in other conferences or lectures, but I'm part of this work now, which is so cool. Like, to be in this seat and then to have everyone here and be on this panel, like, I hear what I've been studying, and then going back to where I work in my job, I get to do it. And it's territory that hasn't been explored yet in many ways, but in other ways, reaching out to other tribal communities who've also been asking these same questions. And now we have organizations having a larger impact on to partner and to collaborate with our tribal nations to answer some of these questions. So just want to say that from a research standpoint and a student and a nerdy brain that I have, like, I'm so excited to hear all of these conversations from the panel this morning to the Leadership Council conversations that we have. Like, this is like the world that I hope other people get excited about, or other younger people get excited about, but I'm definitely, like, super excited. Anyway, the last question I want to get to before we end, and it's going to be very short. For CICD and what they do, what answers can researchers provide that would help support economic development? And I'll go with Chris first.
I think continue the research that's been going on. I do think just remembering how important the overall economic condition of the world is in impacting our communities. Specifically, I mean, COVID was a very unfortunate exercise of how much our communities and businesses were on a thread. And even our gaming and our enterprises, when those doors were shut for a month, our economies instantly started falling. And as we continue to move into, uncertainty in economic markets of this time, where, we're seeing increases from everything from everyday goods to the sphere of inflation soon to, some construction materials are probably going to get 12 to 15% higher than they were. We are walking into a phase of uncertainty, and I think making sure that when we look at data as a tool and we're looking at data, that we are very mindful of all of that economic conditions that just could be occurring or will occur over the next year and a half.
I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. And the reason I don't know the answer to that question is because that answer should always be changing. And I think what's important is to ask the researchers to try and keep an open mind and realize that landscapes change, priorities change, things change, and trying to be nimble and responsive to those changes.
One of the things that I've thought about that would be extremely helpful for tribal nations is if we could have just a baseline toolkit of these economic impact studies. And this question came up on the first panel about, are you paying attention to those economic impact studies? And, Dawson remarked a lot of times they're revolving around gaming. And so how do we create a toolkit for tribal nations where they can collect data internally and use it as an advocacy tool when they're talking to their state, their local, their federal counterparts about potential investment and economic development opportunities, or even funding essential governmental programs, and what's the economic impact on tribal lands and the surrounding communities. Having that toolkit where we could continuously update the model, right? And there would be certain intervals, I think, where you would need external analysis and some external survey. But I know that Eastern Band procured an economic impact analysis several years ago when we were talking about gaming expansion, and we wanted to be able to demonstrate to North Carolina just how influential we had been in the regional and the North Carolina economy. And so we commissioned this big study. And thinking about that, it's like, well, why didn't we request what data points were collected and analyzed, and can just continue to refresh that economic analysis, that economic impact analysis again and again and again. I think the other thing that we encountered too at Eastern Band is that it sometimes felt like we weren't making data-driven decisions, or that we didn't have access to data, but we weren't always asking the right questions or looking in the right places, because we found that a lot of our tribal programs, oftentimes informally, were keeping stats on like how many clients they were talking to, how many homes they were building, how much material they were ordering, right? And we could go to these, office managers at these different programs, and they'd have cuff accounts and spreadsheets, and it's like, a data gold mine of like, why weren't you sharing this with us? And they're, well, you never asked for it. And it's like, you have this whole, back end data set of decisions that you're making on a daily basis. And so I think that a lot of times sitting in leadership roles, we're not really aware of how programs are being run, how they're being managed, and what information they truly have access to.
So much, all three of you, for joining us in this conversation. I'm getting the sign for 30 seconds, so give a hand to the panelists for this conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alicia, and thank you to our panelists on an inspiring discussion. Certainly, I looked around the room and saw our CICD staff taking lots of notes of the things that we can do to continue to add value to the data landscape and the research landscape as we look to advance economic prosperity in Indian country. Just a note to our live stream guests, I know we had a little bit of audio issues during the Fireside chat. Just know that we did capture the live recording, and that we will be posting that on CICD's event page for you to go back and listen to the parts of the discussion that you didn't catch. At this time, it is my honor to introduce Federal Reserve Governor Michael Barr. Governor Barr is one of 7 members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System out in Washington, D.C. In this role, he is the oversight governor of the Division of Consumer and Community Affairs. He serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, and he helps shape U.S. monetary policy. He's also the former vice chair for supervision, a role in which he oversaw the supervision of the nation's banks and the bank holding companies. Governor Barr has a long career in public service, including serving as the former assistant secretary of financial institutions at the United States Department of the Treasury. And a couple years ago, Aline and I and a couple of our staff had the incredible privilege of traveling with Governor Barr out to 2 tribal nations in western Montana, including my own. And what I learned in our travels together is that Governor Barr is deeply committed to listening to our community members and listening to how they are experiencing the economy. So it is my profound honor to invite Governor Michael Barr to the stage.
Thanks very much, Casey, for that warm introduction. And it's just a delight to be able to be with you here today. I was coming in from St. Louis, and before that from Atlanta, so I haven't had a chance to see the events from today. But even just walking in the room at the end of the day, I'm sure it was a long day, you can feel the energy that is in the room. And I know that it's a group that cares deeply about the issues that you're working on. I'm just delighted to be able to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Center for Indian Country Development and to further the goal of advancing development through better data. It's a privilege to be present with so many tribal leaders, Federal Reserve colleagues and policymakers, researchers and practitioners, all working to advance Native economies. My experience that Casey mentioned traveling with CICD and engaging in CICD's work has been a meaningful part of my time as a Federal Reserve Governor. At the Board of Governors, I serve as the Oversight Governor for our Division of Consumer and Community Affairs, which supports the community development function across the Federal Reserve System. It's a role that means a great deal to me. Community development has been a cornerstone of my career. As a governor, as a banking regulator, earlier in my career, as a scholar, as a university leader, and the Treasury Department's point person on community development back in the 1990s. I'd like to focus my remarks today on why I think the work you all are doing is critical to the prosperity of Native nations and indigenous communities, and why that success matters for our whole country. 2 years ago, I traveled to western Montana with CICD staff. We visited the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, which is home to the Blackfeet Nation, and the Flathead Indian Reservation, which is home to the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. On our visit, I saw examples of tribal leaders diversifying their economies through tribally owned enterprises, and then leveraging revenue from those enterprises to reinvest in their communities. I heard from business leaders struggling with supply chain challenges and community members pulling together to address housing supply and affordability issues. At a community roundtable, financial leaders talked about credit needs in the regions, including challenges with limited credit and access to financial services and distance from banks. These issues take center stage in CICD research, and in our conversation, research served as a springboard for a variety of community members and leaders to come together to explore solutions. This is why community engagement is a critical part of community development and a huge value add for the Federal Reserve as we seek to understand how people are actually experiencing the economy. I see this same spirit of working together on behalf of a better future, grounded in research, on display here at this conference. There remains consistent economic gaps in Indian country based on many metrics. Native Americans have lower household income, and poverty is a significant problem on many reservations. According to the Federal Reserve Survey of Household Economics and Decision-Making, which we call the SHED survey, Native American households consistently report a lower likelihood of having the cash to pay for a $400 emergency expense, which is a common metric that we use to study financial security. Looking at the labor force, unemployment is higher for Native Americans than for workers overall. Research has also documented a lack of financial institutions in or on or near reservations, which restrict capital and credit availability. A recent study showed that Native-owned small businesses were less likely to receive the financing they applied for, even though they were much more likely to apply for small amounts of credit. Native Americans also face higher costs for home ownership. And economic downturns, as the last panel was describing, can exacerbate these gaps, such as when social distancing measures during the COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately harm sectors such as gaming and entertainment, in which many tribally owned businesses are concentrated. Addressing these persistent challenges requires coordination with local leaders to achieve progress. During my first stint at the Treasury Department in the 1990s, I co-chaired a working group whose objective was to reduce barriers to mortgage lenders and expand access to credit in Indian country, with pilot programs in the Navajo Nation and Oglala Pine Ridge Reservation. The working group helped map out clearer processes for residents to obtain mortgages by coordinating tribal, government, federal, and lender roles. I see this as an example of potential progress that can be made when national and local leaders in the private sector leverage research and come together to find solutions. But it is also a reminder that these are long-standing problems that are still with us very much today. In other ways, tribal governments have been proactive in diversifying their revenue streams and innovating in their use of economic data to make evidence-based decisions. Native Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs, are addressing credit gaps in their communities with culturally informed lending practices and financial services. There are many examples of initiatives targeting specific economic challenges. We see signs of progress, for example, including positive trends in Native American employment and household income. But we'll only know whether we're making economic gains in Indian country over time if we have timely, high-quality data disaggregated for Native peoples and geographies. Data dashboards are not just for researchers. They help tribal nations and decision makers in many capacities make informed decisions about how to allocate resources, design interventions, and monitor economic growth. We know that Indian country has sometimes been referred to as the asterisk nation as a result of insufficient sample sizes of Native Americans in national data sets. Experiences in which external researchers used data in ways that were harmful to tribal communities have also contributed to mistrust of research and data, sometimes in Indian country. And at the same time, many tribal governments have limited resources to allocate towards their own data collection. Research and data advancements in Indian country are changing this narrative. Over the past decade, CICD's research has advanced our understanding of the pillars of tribal communities and potential interventions. We've learned a lot more about the role of tribal governments and tribal enterprises in local and regional economies, and the ways tribal treasuries are distinct from local and state governments. CICD's research has helped us to understand how infrastructure gaps, such as broadband access, can impede economic growth and leave communities much more vulnerable to economic shocks. And it's provided research insights on strategies for increasing access to capital and credit in Native communities. Much of this research has taken place in collaboration with Native organizations, tribal governments, and economic development practitioners. In some of these areas, such as research on the practices and outcomes of Native CDFIs, CICD and its collaborators have provided some of the first systematic quantitative analysis in this field. CICD has also developed a suite of data tools that can empower community members and decision makers to explore economic conditions from the local level to the national level and monitor trends over time. This work to advance economic research and data in Indian country matters to the overall economy. The Federal Reserve promotes a healthy economy and a stable financial system for everyone, and that simply cannot be done without supporting strong and sustainable communities in Indian country. Research tells us that Native economies are closely intertwined with local and regional economies. Examples include tribal casinos attracting visitors to surrounding businesses, and Native enterprises subcontracting with non-Native owned businesses. CICD's mission supports the Federal Reserve Community Development Function, which works to promote access to credit, investment, and financial services in low and moderate income communities, and foster a better understanding of their economic condition. This happens in many ways. As members of the Federal Open Market Committee, my colleagues and I decide on the appropriate setting for monetary policy. In this role, it's vital that we understand how a variety of individuals, institutions, and communities experience the economy. Research from CICD and the Community Development Function teams here in Minneapolis and across the Federal Reserve System shed light on economic circumstances in these communities. As important as it is, monetary policy isn't the main thing that matters to a healthy economy. Businesses, financial practitioners, nonprofits, community leaders, and decision makers at many levels all need research and data to make evidence-based decisions and promote thriving and economically resilient communities. The Community Development Function provides this research and convening power to advance our collective understanding of local financial needs. Our community development work also provides timely on-the-ground insights on developments in the financial system. A prime example of that is the series of surveys CICD conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic. These surveys provided real-time glimpses on the challenges that tribal government, business, and community leaders were facing as a result of the pandemic. In addition, under the Community Reinvestment Act, The Federal Reserve has a statutory obligation to supervise how banks meet the credit needs of their communities, consistent with safe and sound lending practices. And that very much includes communities in Indian country. So we need good data and good analysis to fulfill that statutory mandate. When it comes down to is that the Federal Reserve does our best work when we understand what's happening in communities, and that includes the rich variety of communities across Indian country. As we look to the future, decision makers inside and outside of Indian country can learn from the ways tribal governments have served their communities and guided their economies through many challenges. In my visits with tribal leaders, I have been inspired by their long-range vision, considering how decisions today will affect their ability to care for their communities for generations into the future. I've also come to appreciate the grit and creativity involved in meeting community needs, whether it be through starting a tribal bank to meet local financial services needs, or leveraging tribal enterprises to create employment opportunities, or innovating in the use of economic data to tailor public services to their communities. Much has been said about the economic challenges in Indian country, but perhaps what has impressed me the most in my visits is the sense of optimism for the future for so many people I have met despite these challenges. Thanks to all of you for the important ways you are coming together to use research and data to propel your communities forward. It is an honor to be with you here today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Governor Barr. We are incredibly grateful that you were able to be here in person with us today, despite what I know was a challenging travel schedule. I want to echo Casey in thanking you for making it a priority throughout your time at the board to meet with tribal leaders and community members in Indian country. This has been an incredible day. Neil started us off by reflecting on what we've learned over the past decade of economic research and data in Indian country, and Casey reminded us that we're well positioned to approach the economic questions of the future with the best research and information. We heard important insights on where there are pressing data opportunities and economic innovations that we can all learn from. We've also heard about the many ways Native economies play an important role in the overall economy now and in the future. We heard from Governor Barr just now about the role of community development and how CICD's work fits into that role and that mandate. I want to thank all of our speakers and guests for their perspectives and the contributions that they shared. I also feel like I took away a lot from today's conversation personally and was spending a little bit of time based on Miranda's recommendation on ChatGPT looking up what images show up, and it's really quite striking. She's right. Our conversations will continue tomorrow at a special milestone year-end edition of the CICD's Data Summit. The Data Summit will again take place in person here at the Minneapolis Fed and will be live streamed. We have another incredible lineup of speakers joining us tomorrow and the opportunity to dive deeper into specific economic topics, including innovations in tribal public finance, the role of data in diversifying tribal enterprises, and how partnerships are impacting the investment landscape in Native communities. Tomorrow, we'll also celebrate the official national launch of the Survey of Native Nations, which is a collaboration between the Center for Indian Country Development and tribal governments across the country to advance the tribal public finance data. I know, thank you. This is a significant step forward in our work to address data gaps in Indian country. Through Census Bureau tools, state and local governments have had access to benchmark revenue and expenditure data that help them understand how their government's revenues and expenditures compare to those of other governments and identify areas of financial opportunity. But similar data have not been available to tribal governments in a comprehensive way. We spent all day talking about additional data and data opportunities and data gaps, and this hopefully will be a way that we can move towards addressing it. Over the past 2 years, CICD has collaborated with a growing number of tribal governments to pilot and test a secure way of collecting and providing this information to Indian country. The affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians and the United South and Eastern tribes have also been important partners in this work. I want to thank AT&I, USET, and all of the tribes that participated in the survey pilots up to now for their contributions in addressing a long-standing data gap in Indian country. We're really excited to be able to now offer the survey to all tribes who are interested in taking part. Participating tribes will receive confidential reports that provide a series of charts and analysis showing their tribe's data in the context of aggregated data for tribes across the country. And you'll learn more about the Survey of Native Nations tomorrow in a panel at our Data Summit. So I realize that I'm standing between all of you and a fun reception. So I'm looking forward to seeing many of you tomorrow. And for those of you who are here in Minneapolis, I hope that you enjoy it. Stay with us for the reception. It's really been our honor and privilege to spend this time with you together today. Thank you.